We arrived in Sapa just before dusk, after what felt like an endless journey through winding mountain roads. The kind that made your stomach roll, but your eyes widen, because every turn revealed a view more breathtaking than the last. Fog curling over terraced rice fields, roofs of wooden houses peeking through bamboo groves, and clouds hanging low like you could reach out and brush them with your fingertips. I remember sticking my head out of the car window, letting the cold air slap my face, laughing like a child, even though part of me was exhausted. He smiled from the driver's seat and said, "Welcome to paradise." It almost was. We stayed at a homestay called Hoalan, nestled against the side of a hill, wrapped in mist and silence. The owner, an old woman with gentle eyes and a mouth that always seemed to be chewing something, handed me a cup of tea that smelled like dried leaves and firewood. I loved it instantly. Our room was small with creaky wooden floors and a large window that opened out to the mountains. That night, I fell asleep with my cheek pressed against his shoulder, the distant sound of crickets lulling me into dreams I would soon forget. The first couple of days were peaceful, almost too peaceful. He took me around the nearby villages. We walked hand in hand through muddy paths lined with cornstalks and wildflowers. We tried grilled eggs from a vendor by the roadside and shared a bottle of local corn wine that left us red-faced and giggling. He even bought me a pair of hand-stitched gloves from an old Hmong woman who said we looked like newlyweds. But even in those moments of laughter, something gnawed at me. There were times, short, barely noticeable gaps, when he would disappear. Sometimes for 10 minutes, sometimes longer. He always returned with a reason. I went to check the viewpoint, or I wanted to ask the locals about a trail. But the excuses felt rehearsed. His eyes flicked away too fast. His smile didn't always reach his eyes. Still, I didn't say anything. Maybe I was being paranoid. Maybe the thin air was messing with my thoughts. Then, on the morning of the fourth day, he woke me up earlier than usual. The sun hadn't even fully risen yet. He was already dressed, wearing that weathered olive green jacket he always packed for hiking trips. "I found something special," he whispered, brushing hair away from my face. "A path not many people know. I asked around last night." I blinked at him, groggy. "Now?" He nodded. "We'll need to hike, but it's worth it. There's a guide who can take us." I should have asked more questions. I should have said no, but there was something in the way he said "worth it," like a secret just for us. I wanted to believe that. We packed a small bag with water, some snacks, and the first aid kit he always insisted we bring. As we stepped outside, I noticed the fog was thicker that morning, almost like a veil draped over the village. She was waiting at the trailhead. The guide, a small woman, maybe in her late 20s, wearing a black windbreaker and a red scarf tied around her neck. Her face was sharp, high cheekbones, narrow eyes, lips painted a deep plum. I thought it was strange, the lipstick. Who wears lipstick to guide a mountain hike? He greeted her first. They exchanged a few words in Vietnamese, quick and low. Then she turned to me, nodded silently, didn't offer a handshake, didn't smile. "This is Mai," he said. "She'll take us through the off-trail route. It's not far, but it's hidden." "Hi," I offered, trying to sound friendly. "Thanks for guiding us." She only nodded again, then turned and started walking. The trail wound through tall grasses and dense bamboo. Every so often, we'd pass a stream or a tree covered in moss like an old man's beard. Mai walked ahead, light-footed, like she belonged to the forest. I followed next, and he brought up the rear. It felt strange, like I was in the middle of something I didn't understand. We hiked for hours that day. Whenever I asked a question, "How far now?" or "What's that flower?" Mai either ignored me or answered in curt one-word replies. But when he spoke to her, in Vietnamese, her whole demeanor changed. Her voice softened, her eyes sparkled, and once I even caught a hint of a smile. A private joke I wasn't part of. At some point, we stopped to rest near a rock formation. I pulled out a granola bar and he sat beside me, wiping sweat from his brow. Mai stood a few feet away, her back turned. "She doesn't like me much," I said, half joking. He looked surprised. "Why do you say that?" "She hasn't spoken more than 10 words to me. She's just shy," he shrugged, "and not everyone's comfortable with English. But she speaks it." I insisted. He didn't reply. Later that night, we reached a wooden shack, one of those makeshift shelters built for passing hikers. There was no electricity, only candles and a small fire pit. I lay on the thin mat, staring at the flickering shadows on the wall. He said he was going to get more firewood. He was gone for almost 30 minutes. When he returned, I pretended to be asleep. I heard him whisper something outside before stepping in. I didn't dare ask who he was talking to. My chest felt tight. The next morning, I woke up with a strange feeling in my bones. Not cold, not sick, just wrong, like my body was trying to warn me. I looked over to his side of the mat. Empty. I sat up, heart racing, only to see him sitting outside with Mai. They were talking, close, too close. Her hand brushed his arm as she laughed at something he said. And for a split second, not longer, he looked up, saw me watching, and his smile disappeared. Later, when I asked him what they were talking about, he simply said, "She was telling me about a shortcut to a beautiful cliff view. You'll love it." I wanted to believe him. I really, really did. We left the shack after a quick breakfast of stale bread and dried fruit. The sky was overcast, and the air felt heavier than usual, thick with that strange kind of silence that comes before a storm. I kept telling myself it was just the altitude, just the wilderness playing tricks on me. But deep down, I knew something had shifted. We didn't speak much that morning. Even he was quiet. Too quiet. He walked slightly ahead of me this time, next to Mai. I kept my distance, partly because my legs ached from the hike, but mostly because I didn't want to see the way she looked at him when she thought I wasn't watching. She had started smiling more, laughing more. Not with me, only with him. We walked for what felt like hours. The trail grew steeper, winding up the mountainside until trees thinned and the view opened up. Terraced fields cascading down the valley like green waves frozen in time. It was breathtaking. But I couldn't enjoy it. My chest felt tight, like I'd swallowed a stone. Mai stopped abruptly near a narrow ledge that jutted out from the cliff. "This way," she said, pointing. Her English was clearer now. No hesitation, no awkwardness. I caught that detail and tucked it away like a thorn. The ledge wasn't wide. On one side, the mountain wall rose high and rough. On the other, a sharp drop into clouds and silence. "No railings?" I asked, forcing a laugh. She shrugged. "Nature has no rails." I hesitated, but he was already stepping out onto it, confidently, like he'd done it 100 times before. I followed, planting each foot carefully, my arms out slightly for balance. The drop to my left pulled at my stomach. The wind picked up. I tasted dust and pine on my tongue. When we reached the end of the ledge, there was a small plateau, barely large enough for the three of us. But the view, oh, the view. Hills folded into each other in endless shades of green and gold, disappearing into mist. The sky opened wide, a pale gray canvas painted with streaks of light. He handed me his phone. "Take a picture?" he asked, smiling. I held it up, trying to frame the shot. Mai stood beside him. Their shoulders touched. She didn't move away. "Smile," I said, voice tight. Click. He took the phone back, looked at the photo, then handed it to Mai. They whispered. She laughed again. "I'll go stand closer to the edge," I said suddenly, trying to reclaim the moment. "Maybe we can get the valley in the background." I stepped forward, feeling the wind bite at my cheeks. I could feel them watching behind me. I remember looking down, just a little. Then I felt it, a hand, brief, sudden, on my back, a push. It wasn't hard, not violent, but it was enough. My foot slipped, my arms flailed, the world spun, and then nothing. Nothing but wind and sky and the cold, hard terror of knowing I was falling. I don't know how long I was unconscious. When I opened my eyes, everything was blurry. My body ached in places I didn't know could ache. My head throbbed, and there was a sharp pain in my left shoulder. I was lying on a bed of leaves and mud, wedged between rocks at the bottom of a slope. Not the bottom of the cliff, thank God, but far enough down that I knew I'd fallen hard. I tried to move. Pain screamed through my body. Then I heard rustling. Footsteps. I froze, heart pounding. Was it them? Had they come back to finish the job? But then I saw him. Not my husband. A stranger. A man, maybe in his 30s, wearing a faded jacket and a scarf around his head. He crouched beside me, eyes full of worry. "You fell," he said softly in accented English. "Don't move. I help." His voice was calm, grounding. He had a small satchel from which he pulled out a flask of water and a cloth to clean the blood on my forehead. I couldn't speak. My throat was dry, my lips cracked. But I looked into his eyes and felt something I hadn't felt in days. Safety. He moved with care. His hands were rough but gentle. He checked my arm, muttered something I couldn't understand, then carefully wrapped it with cloth torn from his own sleeve. "What's your name?" I whispered. "Dung," he said. "I live near." I nodded slowly. The pain was still there, sharp and insistent, but my panic began to fade. "Can you help me get back?" He paused. "You cannot walk now. Too dangerous. We go slow. My house closed, one night. Then we go." I should have hesitated, should have worried, but something about his voice, or maybe the way he knelt beside me, like I wasn't a burden, made me believe him. That belief saved my life. He fashioned a stretcher from bamboo and rope, and somehow, with strength I didn't know one person could have, he got me down the rest of the slope and into a tiny house nestled among trees. There were chickens outside. A radio played old Vietnamese love songs in the background. He gave me soup, simple, hot, healing. He didn't ask many questions, but his eyes never left mine. That night, as I lay on a mat in the corner of his hut, I thought of them. I thought of the hand, the push, and the way he didn't come looking for me. He didn't come looking. That was when the truth began to unspool in my mind. Not all of it. Not yet. But enough to know that what happened on that mountain wasn't an accident, and that I was very, very lucky to be alive. I didn't sleep much that night. The wind outside rustled through the banana leaves like whispers, and every creak of the wooden walls made me flinch. My body throbbed with dull pain, shoulder, ribs, knees. But it was the questions that kept me awake, churning in my chest, louder than any storm. Why didn't he come? He should have. Even if I slipped, even if it was all just a terrible accident, he should have run to find me. Should have shouted my name into the trees. Should have panicked, but he didn't. And neither did she. In the morning, Dung helped me sit up. He'd brewed tea, strong and earthy, with something bitter in it that settled my stomach. "You remember more now?" he asked quietly. I did. I remembered the second I turned my back to them. The whisper of movement, the pressure on my lower back, brief, sharp, unmistakable, not a stumble, not the wind, a push. I started, my voice cracked and dry. "I think someone tried to kill me." Dung didn't flinch. He just nodded, slow and solemn, as if he'd already known. "You no fall far enough," he said simply. "Lucky. Rocks caught you." I shivered. He asked if I wanted him to report it. To the police, to the guides in the village, even to the local commune. I hesitated. My mind was still foggy, but I knew enough to be afraid. "No," I whispered. "Not yet. I need to figure this out first." He didn't push me. Instead, he let me stay. For 2 more days, I remained in Dung's home, resting, recovering, observing. He gave me space but kept me company when I needed it. He spoke little about himself, only that he'd once worked in the city but came back to care for his aging parents. Now he lived simply, mostly alone. The simplicity was comforting, predictable, safe. I used his old phone to check the time and date. No messages, no missed calls. From him, nothing. Not even a fake search party. No sign that he'd contacted police or reported me missing. It became clearer with every hour. He didn't expect me to come back. On the 3rd morning, Dung helped me stand and take a few shaky steps outside. The sun was soft, diffused through clouds. The air was crisp and pine-scented. He pointed to a nearby ridge where I could see the trail that led back to the village. "We go slow," he said. "I walk with you." I nodded. My mind was already calculating. I needed to go back, not to confront them. Not yet. I just needed to see, to watch, to confirm what my heart already suspected. And I needed to survive long enough to figure out why. We reached the outskirts of the village just before sunset. I asked Dung to wait behind as I approached. I didn't want them to see me yet. Not until I knew where they were, what they were doing. I slipped into the edge of the homestay's property, crouching behind a row of bushes. It wasn't hard. The place was so open and no one was expecting a woman they believed dead. They were on the porch, laughing, laughing. He was sitting on the same bench where I'd once leaned on his shoulder after our long treks. She had her feet tucked under her, a blanket over both of their laps. They were drinking tea, the same cups we used. And then she leaned in. Not subtly, not sweetly, boldly. Her hand reached to his chest and he didn't flinch. He smiled. I felt the world tilt beneath me again, though this time it wasn't gravity. It was betrayal. The pieces fell into place one by one. Why he brought her along as a translator, why she always walked beside him, not me, why he was pushing for this trip, why he'd taken out that insurance policy, the one he insisted we sign just in case something happened overseas. I hadn't questioned it. I wanted to feel like we were building a life together. I thought married couples did things like that, planning for the future, sharing the risks. But maybe he'd never planned for our future, just his. I stepped back into the shadows, my heart pounding so loudly I thought they might hear it. I walked away, slowly, carefully, quietly. When I returned to Dung, I didn't need to say anything. He saw it on my face. "Stay with me longer," he said gently. "You're not ready yet." He was right, I wasn't. That night, I sat by the small fire in Dung's hut, wrapped in his mother's old blanket, staring into the flames. I thought of our wedding, how he'd cried at the altar. I thought of the way he used to stroke my hair when I fell asleep on the couch after long work nights. I thought of the little things, the silly songs we made up while cooking, the arguments over which brand of coffee was better, the matching raincoats we bought before this trip. And then I thought of that hand. On my back, the push, and her face, the flicker of something in her eyes when I almost slipped on the rocks the day before it happened. A flash of worry. No, not worry. Disappointment. They were in this together. Somehow, I knew. I didn't have proof. Not yet. But I had the truth, and it burned inside me like a secret I couldn't unsee. Over the next few days, I began to plan. Slowly, quietly, carefully. I stayed hidden in the hills, letting them believe I was gone. I would let them relax, let them slip into the comfort of guiltless freedom. And when the time was right, I'd come back. Not for revenge, but for truth, because they tried to erase me, and I would make sure they never forgot I existed. The next morning, as the mist still clung to the valley like a soft blanket, I woke with a plan swirling in my mind. Fragile, yet burning bright. I had no one to trust but myself. Dung had been my unexpected guardian angel, but he had his own life. It was time for me to take back control. I dressed quietly, the same worn jacket I had brought from home, and tucked my few belongings into my backpack. Dung woke and saw me preparing to leave, but instead of protesting, he only nodded with a quiet understanding in his eyes. "Be careful," he said simply. I promised I would. Stepping back toward the village, I felt the weight of my body, every ache, every bruise, but also a strange surge of clarity. This place, with its winding paths and emerald hills, was no longer just a vacation spot. It was the setting of a betrayal I needed to untangle. I wandered the village, watching from the shadows, piecing together their days after I disappeared. They acted as if nothing had happened. The same smiles, the same easy laughter. It was all a lie, a cruel mask. One afternoon, I caught a glimpse of the guide, the woman who had come with us into the mountains. She was chatting animatedly with my husband at the homestay porch, her hand casually brushing his arm. There was a softness in their smiles that made my stomach twist. They were more than just friends, more than just colleagues. But I had no proof, just a sinking certainty. As I retraced our footsteps from the trip, each bend, each hidden trail, I noticed small things I'd missed before. Footprints in the soft mud that didn't match my husband's shoes, a discarded scarf with a faint perfume I couldn't place. My mind raced. Had they planned my accident together? Had this guide been the silent accomplice all along? That night, hiding in an abandoned hut near the woods, I recalled the moment I almost fell. I remembered the glint in the guide's eyes. Was it satisfaction? Or fear? I couldn't tell. But something about her was off. I had to learn more. The next day, I followed the guide from a distance. She walked with confidence, her steps quick but measured. I kept to the shadows, heart pounding as I trailed her through narrow paths and hidden clearings. Eventually, she stopped at a small, secluded cabin deep in the forest, a place no tourist would find by accident. She entered, and after a moment, my husband appeared from the other side, arms wrapped around her waist. Seeing them like that broke something inside me, a rush of cold anger and deep, aching sadness. I returned to Dung's place that night, exhausted and emotionally raw. He listened silently as I shared everything, the glimpses, the feelings, the questions I couldn't yet answer. "You deserve better," he said quietly. I nodded. I wanted to believe in those words, but my heart was tangled in doubt and fear. How far would they go? What else had they planned? And more terrifyingly, why? Days passed in a blur of cautious observation and quiet healing. I watched their movements, listened to whispered conversations, and tried to stay invisible. but with every moment, the danger grew clearer. This was no accident. It was a trap. One evening, as the sun dipped low behind the mountains, I returned to the trail where I had nearly fallen. The memory was fresh, the rush of air, the sharp rock edge, the sudden shock of the fall, and the shadow behind me. A figure had been there, watching, waiting. I wasn't just a victim of fate. I was hunted. That night, alone in Dung's small home, I wrestled with the growing storm inside me. Fear, confusion, heartbreak, all swirling in a cyclone of emotions. But beneath it all, a spark ignited. A resolve. I would survive. I would uncover the truth. And I would make sure they paid for trying to erase me. The next morning, the air was crisp and sharp, the scent of pine needles heavy in the cool breeze. I had made a decision. I couldn't stay hidden forever, but I wasn't ready to confront them either. I needed to gather evidence, something concrete, something I could use to prove everything. Dung had offered to help, and together we devised a plan. He knew the local paths like the back of his hand, and he agreed to keep watch while I moved carefully through the village and homestay grounds. My first move was subtle. A casual approach to the homestay's caretaker, under the pretense of needing directions and local information. I kept my voice steady even though my heart raced. "I'm looking for something I lost on the trail," I told her. "A scarf or a jacket. It might have blown away." She nodded and smiled kindly, unaware of my real purpose. "People come and go here," she said. "Sometimes things get left behind. I'll ask around." I thanked her and left quickly, the wheels in my mind spinning. Every small interaction was a step closer to uncovering the truth. Over the next 2 days, I shadowed the guide discreetly, noting every detail, where she went, who she met, the way she smiled at my husband. It was a cruel performance they played, two people hiding a secret beneath the guise of friendship. One afternoon, I overheard a conversation between the guide and another local in the village market. Their voices were low, urgent. "They're watching," the guide whispered. "She's getting too close. We can't afford mistakes." My blood ran cold. That night, I sat with Dung, sharing everything. His face hardened. "They will try again," he warned. "We must be ready." I nodded, knowing he was right. We fortified his home, setting traps and alarms. I practiced moving quietly, learning to blend into the shadows. Every moment was a lesson in survival. Days turned into a tense rhythm. Watching, waiting, planning. My husband and the guide seemed unaware I was alive. They moved freely, their betrayal wrapped in smiles and lies. But I was no longer the frightened woman who had nearly fallen to her death. I was a ghost, unseen but watching. On the 5th day, I found the proof I needed. A torn piece of the guide's scarf snagged on a bush near the edge of the trail. It smelled faintly of the perfume I had noticed before, a signature scent. With that, I felt a flicker of hope. If I could find more, if I could document their plans, I could expose them, and finally, make them face justice. I returned to Dung's home that evening, tired but determined. He handed me a small recorder and a camera, discreet tools to gather evidence. "Be careful," he said. "I will," I promised. As I lay down to rest, my mind was already racing ahead, planning my next move, the moment I would finally reclaim my life. Because no matter what happened, I was not going to disappear. Not this time.